If you're in the system, you know that the banks today are still paying for the sins of what happened prior to 2009, August the 13th, according to my colleague Simeon Ibulu and Ria Chebere here. I'll be going through the final lap of the show now. Thank you, gentlemen. It's called the Sinking Fund. Simeon, thanks for bringing this through that. This Sinking Fund, which was set up 10 years ago, is still sinking money. Today's money for yesterday's sins from the banks. And you said this is still a problem. Part of the problem we need to clean up moving forward. Or we need to find a solution to.
It's a big problem. It's a huge problem. And anytime you go to any of these banks' AGMs, the shareholders don't spare no effort in telling the management and the board that, look, you are depleting our returns by this continuous payment of sinking fund to AMCON.
But it's mandatory by the central bank.
It's mandatory.
It's been mandatory for 10 years.
Because we are saying today that the banks are still in unstable condition. And if the money they generate, the little of it is now used to offset, debts of 10 years ago, and there's no end in sight, when do you expect these banks to be stable, steady, to make enough funds?
I'm kind of still there because this is part of the things we need to. I'm not sure you can end.
This is what I'm saying.
Even if the banks are stable today, the banks are stable today. But then the instability of 10 years ago is still being carried into the sinking fund.
Yes, let's make the distinction. When we say banks are owned primarily by shareholders, the ordinary man on the street. Do you understand? Those banks that were liquidated, the shareholders were the first line of people that suffered it most. Those that took the loans for which these shareholders are still paying for today,
through the sinking fund,
are living big, fat, and comfortable. So when we say sinking fund to sustain the banks, we are actually saying that the shareholder in the banks, should continuously pay for the sins of the big. You understand?
Or the big boys.
Big boys,
Who took the big money in those big banks.
It's not rational. You must find a way.
So the central bank need to take a second
look into
the sinking fund issue, which is tied somehow to AMCON, which is still in existence. And it doesn't look like Mr. President is keen on AMCON 2.0. Based on what he signed, the amended AMCON Act, like I said, when there's a closure of AMCON, the asset, whatever, should be transferred to the central bank or any government agency. Ray, do you think perhaps this is Mr. President giving every one of us a signaling that by July next year or so, AMCON may be on its way out?
It's something that is really in the statute. So it's not something that you just wake up and then decide on whether to do it or not to do it.
By the existing act, it's a 10-year.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
It hasn't been given another life.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So
status bad.
So bad.
So we should start counting down, perhaps, the final 1 year of AMCON.
To start making another arrangement.
It doesn't look like Mr. President Buhari wants to tolerate another arrangement. Based on what he says, that the AMCON and EFCC and ICPC and the central bank others now should go after those who are debtors, 5 trillion in AMCON.
I think part of that assent of the president was that the chairmanship of AMCON should now reside with the CBN. On
a part-time basis?
Yes. So in a sense, the operations, the management, and the oversight functions of AMCON is now shifting to the CBN.
Perhaps as preparatory to a winding down.
I also think that how everything will play out at the end of the day will depend on how the ability of AMCON to use the new powers more or less given to it by the president to recover better part of this.
Before it starts wrapping up.
Before it starts wrapping up.
Yes. Again, I'm sure the banks will be happy to see AMCON go with this sinking fund that just brought into the conversation. You say, oh, thank goodness. Well, we can take that off our back. Thank you so much. I'm sure by now the banks will be willing and happy to see AMCON go.
Who wants to be paying and you don't know what you're paying for?
And it's coming from today's profit.
Right.
To pay for yesterday's bad behavior. By those who are most of those who are still smiling with some of the cash locked up somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, one issue, you know, in the course of our facing with AMCOM, the problem they have always said, mentioned is the value of those assets as of today is far below, you understand?
When they were
acquired.
Yeah.
So rather than the assets appreciating, you understand, the value has so far gone down. So if you value the AMCOM debts on the basis of the assets they are holding, it's far below 5 point.
So it's better to let go.
Yeah.
It's better to let go. We need to draw the line in the sand somehow, and when we need to let AMCOM go. Let's just draw the line on this conversation for now. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's a public holiday. We managed to get all of you a nice shirt, a nice suit, looking very nice here in the studio this morning when you ought to be home for a public holiday. Thank you so much for coming, gentlemen of the press. Ray Shebri, thank you so much, and Simeon Ebulu, the group business editor at the Nation newspapers. Okay, so let's talk about Brexit and a few other things. It looks like a friend in need is a friend indeed, and that looks like what just Bolton, an official of the U.S. government, says when he says UK will be the first in line for U.S. trade deal. And my colleague Simon Pusey at our London studios told me earlier in a WhatsApp conversation, I said, everyone is excited about that. Why is that? Simon, flesh this up for us. Good morning.
Morning, Bosun. Yes, so this is President Trump's national security advisor, and he's making headlines here today, as you said, after he said the UK is first in line for a trade deal with the US. It's after he met the Prime Minister Boris Johnson at number 10 Downing Street earlier. John Bolton said the US supported a no-deal Brexit, which, of course, Boris Johnson hasn't ruled out. He said, and I quote, both I and President Trump were leavers before there were levers. So he's saying they were always wanting them to leave the EU, even before that question was put to the people. According to Mr. Bolton, Washington would propose an accelerated series of trade deals. These are deals that could be done on a sector-by-sector basis, he said, with an agreement on manufacturing being done first. He said a bilateral agreement or series of agreements could be carved out very quickly and very straightforwardly. Another quote for you, too, to be clear, the Trump administration, Britain's constantly at the front of the trade queue or the line, as we say, said Mr. Bolton. Now, remember when Theresa May was pushing for her deal to be agreed in Parliament, Donald Trump came out and said very clearly that the withdrawal agreement sounds like a good deal for the EU, but meant that the UK might not be able to do a trade deal with the US. And now all of a sudden Boris Johnson's in power and is open to the idea of leaving the EU without a deal, and suddenly Britain is supposedly front of the queue. Mr. Bolton also criticised the European Union and accused them of treating voters, he said, like peasants. He said regarding the EU, the fashion in the European Union, when the people vote the wrong way, from that way, then the elites want to go back to the voters and make them vote again until they get it right, he said. My impression of this is that both Boris and Donald Trump are pretty similar in the way that they say things to please whichever audience they are currently speaking to. So Boris will have been very accommodating in these meetings, very positive regarding the kind of deals that the UK would be open to, but it remains to be seen when it comes down to the detail. And remember, Boris is accused of not being very good at detail. It remains to be seen if this is actually realistic in practice.
In just about a minute, Simon, so where is the optimism? Still talking about Brexit with the Clothier and Next CEO Wolfson saying, look, this can happen. We can have a very jolly ride post-Brexit. Where is the optimism coming from?
Yeah, so Lord Wolfson, he's the chief executive of the clothing firm Next, as you said, and he said he still hoped a deal could be done before the 31st of October, but he said that the government's increased focus on contingency planning meant that the UK was close to being well prepared. Simplified customs and border procedures had made the chance of hold-ups of goods far less likely, he said. It has to be said, though, that Lord Wolfson was a strong advocate of Brexit in the run-up to the referendum, but he had previously warned that a no-deal Brexit would bring chaos, while stopping short of a catastrophe. But he's now changed his tune somewhat. He said we're a long way from disorder and chaos, and he said the fact that HMRC had introduced these transition methods would make an enormous difference. So I think he's basically being positive of the fact that if there is a no-deal Brexit, that businesses won't be affected too badly. Like he said that before, there could be chaos. Okay,
I'm going to hand you over to Chimeze Obiwago, on our Business Incorporated at 1:30 to take a look at the UK equity and currency market for today as we start look at the second trading day. It's still a public holiday here. You folks are having a nice time. Nigerian markets will be reopening tomorrow. Thank you, Simon. Have a great day. And thank you, everyone, for watching this special edition of Business Morning, August 13, 2009. Remembered, I am Bosin Amofai, and I'll see you tomorrow. Business will be reopening. I'm excited. Are you?